मीनाक्षरसमाम्नायमधिगम्य महेश्वरात् कृष्णं व्याकरणं प्रोक्तं तस्मै पाणिनिये नमः। वाक्यकारं वररुचिं भाष्यकारं पतञ्जलिं पाणिनिं सूत्रकारं च प्रणतोऽस्मि मुनित्रयं नत्वा सरस्वतीं देवीं शुद्धां गुण्यां करोम्यहं पाणिनीयप्रवेशाय लघुसिद्धान्तकौमुद्याः सुधाटीकायाः अस्मिन् द्वितीये पर्वणि स्वागतम्। As per the request from on the WhatsApp group from many of you, I want to start, or people want me to discuss a little bit about Vipratishedhe Param Karyam. Vipratishedhe Param Karyam is actually a very small piece in this actual entire puzzle of Badhya Badhaka Bhava. So what is Badhya Badhaka Bhava? I'm sure you all know a little about this.
How one sutra affects the application of the other sutra, or when two sutras are eligible to be applied at the same time.
So, in any step of a prakriya, correct. So in any step of the prakriya, when there is a simultaneous possibility of the two sutras, we need to choose one of them. Okay, so that's basically Badhya Badhaka Bhava. We need to choose only one of them. The one that doesn't get chosen is called Badhya. The one that gets chosen is called Badhaka. So the decision of which is Badhya and which is Badhaka is called Badhya Badhaka Bhava. Now, there is a set of rules that are defined to come to that precise order. Most of you have studied these rules, at least on the face of it, at some or the other places. Can somebody, or can you all collectively enumerate what happens when two sutras stand in front of each other, conflicting each other? How do you decide which sutra?
First thing I think we see if there is an utsarga apavada vyavastha between them. Like okay, in so general,
correct. Step number 1 is utsarga and apavada vyavastha. You can elaborate on it.
So how we generally look at is if a sutra is of a narrow perspective when compared to the other. Like for an example, ad gunaha, if we take ad gunaha and akasavarne dirghaha is an apavada of ad gunaha, or directly if we want to take, it's a vriddhi rechi. So vriddhi rechi, those nimittas are actually it lies inside ad gunaha. So here we talk about niravakashatvam. If vriddhi rechi does not apply when these two sutras compete with each other, it does not have presence anywhere. So niravakashatvam apavadasya bijam iti matva, we use the vriddhi rechi in wherever vriddhi rechi is applicable in comparison with ad gunaha. That is one type we see that utsarga apavada relationship between sutra, and choose apavada.
Makes sense. So that's first. We will go over more definition of what is apavada and how you define apavada and so on. But this is a standard definition. Niravakashatvam apavadasya bijam yena na prapte yo vidhirarabhyate satasya badhako bhavati is yet another standard definition of apavadatvam. But we will talk about it. But there is something called utsarga and apavada, and that is the first test that we have to do. What if the sutras are not utsarga and apavada relation with each other? What if they don't have this relationship?
No, then we can go for this Vipratishethe Param Karyam, and whichever comes later.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. Anything else? Any other answer? Then she says we can go to
if they have a tulya bala.
Yeah, I understand. But my question is this: when two sutras stand in front of each other and you cannot decide if one of them is apavada and other is utsarga, what do you do?
Nitya, antaranga, all that we see.
Okay, so all that we see. Okay, but what do we see amongst that? Like there are again, then there is a different level of conflict. Should I see Vipratisheda, or should I see Nitya, or should I see Antaranga? It's different types of conflict you're talking about, like meta level conflict. So you understand what I'm saying, right? There are so many tools that you just mentioned. You mentioned something called Vipratisheda. You mentioned something called Nitya Anitya. These are like tools in your toolbox. You mentioned something called as Antaranga Bahiranga. You mentioned something called as Utsarga Pavada. So when two sutras stand next to each other, competing with each other, the first tool that you use is Utsarga Pavada. But what if that tool is ineffective? What is the next tool that you have to use? So this sequence is extremely important to understand. The four tools that you mentioned must be used in a particular way. Utsarga Apavada number 1, Antaranga Bahiranga number 2, Nitya Anitya number 3, Purva Para number 4. There is no word Vipratisheda in this entire list. we say antaranga bahiranga, so utsarga apavada number 1, antaranga bahiranga number 2, nitya anitya number 3, and purva para number 4. That is exactly what is captured by Nagesha in the paribhasha purva para nitya antaranga apavadanam uttarottaram baliyaha. 38, paribhasha number 38, which I think some of you might have at least studied on the face of it. So purva para nitya antaranga, that j is a typing mistake, I just fixed it yesterday. Purva para nitya antaranga apavadanam uttarottaram baliyaha. So one better than or one more powerful than another. When you say uttarottaram baliya, you have to start reading from right to left. So there is apavada, apavada brings the corresponding component or utsarga. Then he says antaranga, the corresponding component is bahiranga. Then he says nitya, the corresponding component is anitya. And then you have para, the corresponding component is purva. Purva para nitya antaranga apavadanam uttarottaram baliha. You have to understand that these terms are all relative. So if I ask you, is this sutra an apavada? That's a nonsensical question. This is an apavada to what? This is an utsarga to what? So the terms utsarga and apavada must be used in pairs. A same sutra can be utsarga for something else and apavada for something else. A same sutra can be antaranga to something else and bahiranga to something else. A same sutra can be nitya to something else and anitya to something else. A same sutra can be para to something else and purva to something else. So saying that this sutra is purva, saying that this sutra is nitya is not like hardcore categories. Like for example, you say this sutra is adhikara. It is always an adhikara. You don't care what are the other sutras. A sutra is a samnya sutra. It is a samnya sutra. This is not like that. A sutra is always one nitya or anitya with respect to certain. So you have to take sutra dvayam. And therefore we always say sutra dvayasya yugapat praptau. When the two sutras are applicable simultaneously, we decide based on a certain set of criteria. First we see utsarga pavadatva, then we see antaranga bahirangatva, then we see nitya anityatva, then we see purva paratva. Fair enough? Now before we go in actual further theory, let's take a few examples. I'm going to quote a very simple set of cases which probably many of you know, and I want you to find out what are the situations of conflict in those examples. Let's take with very simple vana plus oshadhihi. What is the conflict in vana plus oshadhihi?
अत्र आद्गुणः अपि अत्र प्रवर्तते वृद्धिरेचि अपि अतः एतयोः
अपि अत्र प्राप्नोति. The word that we use is प्राप्नोति. There is a difference between prasajjate and prapnoti or pravartate. Pravartate and prasajjati means that the sutra is actually applicable. Prapnoti means comes over there and says I want to apply myself. Prapti versus prasakti. Okay, so adgunaha api prapnoti, vruddhirechi api prapnoti. Which tool you use over there? You use antaranga bahiranga. Sorry, you use utsarga apavadatva tool. You say vruddhirechi is apavada. You say adguna is utsarga. Very simple. Let's take first one more example. Rama shabdasya prathamaikvachanasya rupam. Rama plus sa. Ityatra kasya kasya praptihi asti. Sasajushuruhu will cause a rutva. Kharavasarayor visarjaniya will cause a visarga. You get Ramaha. But is it simple? As simple? Is there nothing else going on over there? This is exactly an eye opener. Every step of the prakriya.
Will supicha.
Supicha is about yayad.
So yayadi, right? Yeah.
Sa is not yay. Okay.
Correct.
You know, this is where it actually tells us that at every step in prakriya you don't see, but there's so much going on. Like the very first word that you'll really studied under the prakriya sense, Ramaha, we don't know that there is jhalanjashonte applicable over there. Padanta jhal varnasya jash varne parivartanam sambhavati. Jhal varna is jhal pratyahara contains a sakara. Jhalanjashonte will cause dakara of sakara. Sakarasya dakara desha, sa and the share the same ucharana sthana. Therefore, sakara gets converted to dakara. There is a conflict between Jhalanjashonte, which is 8-39, and Sasajushoruhu, which is 8-66. And therefore, in Sasajushoruhu, if I remember, they will say it is Jashtva Pavadaha. I don't know which commentaries say this. At least my commentary will hopefully say this. But प्रकृत सूत्रम झलांजशोन्ते इत्यस्य अपवाद रूपेण प्रवर्तते. But you shouldn't believe me. You should believe सिद्धांत कौमुदी जष्ट्वा अपवादः. Okay. So padanta sasya sajush shabdasya sharutvam स्यात् जष्ट्वा अपवादः. And this is what we should learn when learning Rama word. And that's why anybody who learns Siddhanta Kaumudi, I don't think it's there in Laghu Siddhanta Kaumudi. It's probably too much details, but anybody who learns Siddhanta Kaumudi learns this, that in Rama plus Su there is a prapti of Sasajushoruhu and there is a prapti of Jhalanjashonte. Jhalanjashonte is actually an earlier sutram. Sasajushoruhu is later sutram. You are in the Tripadi boundary, which means that technically speaking, 8 to 39 does not see 8 to 66. So Jalan Jashante should actually get executed, and this question should had come to, I'm sure it was answered, but if it was not answered, it should have come to you that Rama plus Su ityatra Jalan Jashonti iti jastvasya praptihi asti apavadattvena tatra sasajushoruhu iti pravartate. This also tells us that Utsarga apavada goes beyond the boundary of Tripadi. There is no distinction of Sapadav Saptadhe versus Tripadi for Utsarga Apavada, because Rutva, which comes later on, is an Apavada of Jashtva, which comes earlier. It's not even consecutive. There are many sutras in between 8 to 39 versus 8 to 66. Clear so far? Okay.
So if Jalan Jashonte applies, then the Sasajushoruhu will not find its application.
Sasajushoruhu will not. Why? Because Sasajushoruhu is only for Padanta Sa and Padanta Sajush Shabda converted to Ra. Whenever you have Padanta Sakara, there is Jhalanjashonte. Whenever you have Padanta Shakara, there is Jhalanjashonte. Sh will get converted to Da, Sa will get converted to Da. Because Sa and Sh are both in the Jhal Pratyahara. Clear?
But the Sajush part is not blocked by anything else. Right?
It is blocked, right? Sajush is Shakaranta. Sh will still get
converted.
Oh,
that's
to
also
Da.
Taka. Oh.
Okay, so the entire sutra comes as an apavada for Jhalanjashunti. Clear? I'll talk a lot more about Utsarga Apavada at some point in time, maybe next class or next to next, whatever. But is this clear how this works? Okay. Rama plus Au, Prathama Dvivachan. What are the conflicting? Write down if you want. Take a pen, paper and write down. What are the conflicting situations in Rama plus Au?
Prathamayo Purva Savarnaha.
Okay, okay. Prathamayo Purva Savarnaha.
But Nadichi cancels it, right?
This is very important point. Okay, this is very important point. Keep this in mind. Okay. Anything else? Prathamayo Purva Savarna Nadichi. Next.
Again, Ad Gunaha Vridhirechi.
Ad Gunaha versus Vridhirechi. Okay. Ad Gunaha versus Vridhirechi. Okay. So now an important point to ask over here is that there is a clear conflict between Ad Gunaha and Vridhirechi. The question is there a conflict between Prathamayoho Purva Savarna and Vridhirechi?
Because of Nadichi, so akarasya param yadi tatra ech bhavati tatra prathamyo purva savarnaha na pravartate ataha tasya badakaha nasti iti.
Okay. Okay. So this is pretty much on the right lines, but there's something to learn over here. So understand this. When is the complete meaning of a sutra revealed? This is a very fundamental question that we need to answer. A complete meaning of the sutra gets revealed when the nishedhas of the sutras are brought together along with that sutra. The term that we use over there to describe this is ekavakyata. Ekavakyata means the nishedhas of the sutra come along with, or you take those nishedhas, you embed it inside the sutra, you embed all the adhikaras inside the sutra, and then you say this is the full sutra that is now to be interpreted. So Prathamayoho Purva Savarna should not be interpreted all alone, but Prathamayoho Purva Savarna should be interpreted by saying Prathamayoho Purva Savarnaha Nadichi, which means Prathamadvitya Vibhaktayoho Purva Savarnaha Bhavati Akarat Agre Ich Pratyahara Di Pratyayaha Tatra Navartate Chet. So in case of Rama plus Au, Prathamayoho Purva Savarnaha does not even come. Imagine that there is a wrestling going on and two fighters enter that particular arena. That is a conflict. And when they start fighting, you have to decide who wins. But if one of the component or one of the participant is held back and is not allowed to enter that arena, you won't say there is a conflict. There is only one person standing in the arena because the second one is not allowed to enter that fighting ground. That's exactly what happens. A Nishedha Sutra pulls back the main sutra, the Vidhi Sutra, and it does not allow it to enter in the competition. Therefore, Sarvadhatuka-ardhadhatukayoho, those of you who have studied a little Tinganta Prakaranam, Sarvadhatuka-ardhadhatukayoho gets blocked by Kingiticha. If there is a kit or nit pratyaya, you do not get a guna or a vruddhi. In that case also, Sarvadhatuka-ardhadhatukayoho Kingiticha is the complete sutram, and the meaning of Sarvadhatuka-ardhadhatukayoho is that in presence of a Sarvadhatuka or an Ardhadhatuka pratyaya, which is not a kit, git or nit, guna or vruddhi happens. If you simply take the meaning of Sarvadhatuka Ardhadhatuka yoho, as in case of Sarvadhatuka and Ardhadhatuka pratyaya, the guna or vruddhi happens, you will not be able to deal with Badhyabhataka bhava correctly in a longer run. Therefore, you have to always take the Nishedha Sutram along with the main Vidhi Sutram to do an Ekavakyata, to do a complete meaning before deciding whether that sutra is even applicable or not. And this is the difference between the Nishedha Sutra and Apavada Sutra. Apavada Sutra is also going to stop the Utsarga. Nishedha is also going to stop the Utsarga. But for Nishedha, we do Aneka Vakyata. For Apavada, we don't do Aneka Vakyata like this. We have Apavada and Utsarga standing in front of each other in arena, and we say Apavada will win over Utsarga. Such a competition is not to be done in the Nishedha Sutra and the Vidhi Sutra. We don't keep Prathamayoho Purva Savarnaha and Nadichi in front of each other and cause the fight in between them. The purpose of Nadichi is to pull back Prathamayoho Purva Savarnaha under certain circumstances, and it will do it, but that's not how Prathamayoho Purva Savarnaha and any of these Apavadas will even do. Clear so far? Okay, Rama plus Jasa.
तत्र प्रथमयोः पूर्वसवर्णः अतो
Okay.
गुणे अकस्सवर्णे दीर्घः
अकस्सवर्णे दीर्घः अतो गुणे प्रथमयोः पूर्वसवर्णः अकस्सवर्णे दीर्घः. Anything else?
I think these three are competing.
आद् गुणः अवर्णाद् अचि परे आद् गुणः.
Correct. आद् गुणः.
Okay. 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 Let's take a little bit more complicated. You now have learned most of the Subanta Prakriya, right? Madhu plus Jasa. Madhu, Madhuni, Madhuni. Madhu plus Jasa. Take your time to write down. Okay. Madhu, Madhuni, Madhuni. So how the Prakriya goes in presence of, to start with, we have Madhu plus Jasa. Jasa is a Sarvanamasthana. No, it gets converted to she, and then she becomes Sarvanamasthana. So she is Sarvanamassthanam, and then you have Ikochi Vibhakto. Ikochi Vibhakto gives Numagama, and then because it is Sarvanamasthana, you get Upadha Dirgha by Sarvanamasthani cha Sambuddho, and you get Madhuni.
Yeah. So Ikochi Vibhakto, even Jashasoho, Shihi can compete with each other because both are the Ajadi Pratyaya.
Correct. Not both are the Ajadi. She is also Ajadi, Jas is also Ajadi. Ikochi Vibhakto does not depend on Sarvanamasthana at all. Ikochi Vibhakto is Igantasya Angasya Ajadi Pratyaya Pare Numagama. Igantasya Napumsakasya Ajadi Pratyaya Pare Numagama. It doesn't have the word Sarvanamasthana in it. So Ikochi Vibhakto, the application of Ikochi Vibhakto has nothing to do with Sarvanamasthana. You see Ikochi Vibhakto in Varena, Varani, Varanaha, Varanaha, Varini. Everywhere you see Ikochi Vibhakto. So yes, when you have Madhu plus Jasa, there is a conflict between Jashasoho Shihi and Ikochi Vibhakto. Let's take that particular step. Madhu plus Jasa.
Also Ad Gunaha, Akasavarne Dirghaha. Even Prathamayo Purvasavar.
Where is Ad Gunaha coming over here?
Oh,
Where is
Ukara.
Avarnat Achipare?
Okay, okay. It's Ukara. Okay. But Prathamayo Purvasavarnaha can happen, right?
Prathamayoho Purvasavarnaha. Correct. Prathamayoho Purvasavarnaha, Jashaso Shihi, Ikochi Vibhakto.
There is another sutra instead of the Ikochi Vibhakto. Oh, that is only
Napumsakasya Jalachaha. Napumsakasya Angasya Jalantasya Ajantasya cha Napumsakasya Sarvanamasthane Pare Numagamaha Syat. Is this a Sarvanamasthana? Yet in the Jas Avastha, is it a Sarvanamasthana?
It is not, and also it's Adantanga, I think, right? Napumsakasya Jalachaha.
Jhalantasya Ajantasya. Jhalant Napumsaka, the sutra itself says, right? Napumsakasya Jhalachaha, Jhalantasya Ajantasya Changasya, Jhalachaha. Okay, so Madhu plus Jasa. You don't have Napumsakasya Jhalachaha because Napumsakasya Jhalachaha requires a Sarvanamasthana. Sarvanamasthana can only be obtained when Jasa gets converted to she. We are not yet converting jasa to she. We are still at the first step. The conflict in between jasya soho shihi ikochi vibhaktau prathamayoho purva savarna can definitely come over there. Two more sutras can come over there. Which?
Iko energy.
Very good. Iko yanachi. Excellent. One more sutra.
That's more.
Instead of madhu, if I have sadhu, what would happen?
Jasicha.
Very good.
Jasicha.
Jasicha. Jasicha will give a guna. Jasicha forces a guna. So there is a guna coming over there. Right? Now you understand what Panini was thinking when he had to write all those sutras, all possible Badhyabhataka Bhava, which it's hard for us even to understand and enumerate all of these. But yes, all these Badhyabhataka Bhava exist, and therefore you need a concise system to actually go through all these cases and choose one by one, and that concise system is given by this particular paribhasha, Purvapara Nityantarangapavanam Uttarottaram Baliyaha. Now, each of these words is extremely involved, tricky, overloaded, complicated in Paribhashindushekara, starting from Paribhasha number 38. He starts actually Badha Bija Prakaranam is the second Prakaranam. Paribhashindushekara is divided into three Prakaranas. The middle Prakaranam, Badha Bija Prakaranam, which starts from Paribhasha number 38, Purva Paranityantarangapavadanam Uttarottaram Baliyaha, and it goes all the way till 71. So 38 till 71, almost 30, 33, 34 paribhashas. All these paribhashas talk about just these points: Purva, Para, Nitya, Antaranga, and Utsarga, Apavada. In all these paribhashas, he will start in that sequence. So he will start about Vipratishedha, which is basically the concept of Purva and Para. I'm going to come to that. So this Punah Prasanga Vijnana Siddham, Sakrudgato Vipratishedhe, Vikaranebhyo Niyamo Baliyan, these are about the Vipratishedha part. The next one is Nitya Anitya. So then he says Paran Nityam Balavat Shabdantara se Prapnon Vidir Anityo Anitya 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 Anitya. He talks about a bunch of paribhashas talking about Nitya versus Anitya. So it's not that simple. Then he talks about Antaranga Bahiranga. Asiddham Antaranga Bahirange Najan Antari Antaranga Napi Vidin Antaranga Antaranga Varnadangam Akruta Vyuha Antaranga is till Antaranga Dapi Apavado Baliyan. Then he talks about Apavada. Yena na prapte yo vidhirarabhyate satasya bhatako bhavati apavada vishay utsargo abhinivishade purastad apavadan vidhin antaran vidhin badante madhye apavadan purvan vidhin badante annantarasya vidhirbhavati pratishedo va purvam hi apavadaha abhinivishante. So there's so much till the end, till here, I think. Apavado yadi anyatra, he talks about the utsarga apavada. And towards end, he writes some general paribhashas where Badhyabadaka Bhava itself is in question. Abhyasa Vikareshu Badhyabadaka Bhavo Nasti, Tachilikeshu Badhyabadaka Bhavo Nasti, Talittuman Khalarteshu Badhaka Bhavo Nasti, Ladesheshu Vasarupa Vidir Nasti, Ubhay Nirdeshe Panchami Nirdesho Baliyan. So very beautifully arranged Badhyabadaka Bhava with multiple paribhashas for each of these particular components. You'll understand how detailed it is. So it will probably take 50, 60 classes to understand this whole thing fully. If you want to study paribhashas fully, it will take some 50, 60 classes. Even if you want to extract the Badhyabadaka component, Badhyabadaka Bhava component of it, not really talk about what Nagesha says. This 50th paribhasha, single paribhasha, Siddham Bahirangam it will take at least 20 classes to teach. Okay, you just see the scope of this paribhasha. He goes on and on and on and on and on and on and just doesn't end. And each of these line usually takes at least 15 to 20 minutes to teach. This is the biggest paribhasha, Siddham Bahirangam. Okay, so the topic of Badhyabadaka Bhava is not something that gets covered in a single class. It's like entire Shastra system is based on it. Okay, but what I am going to do is I am going to just get you started with this. We will start with Vipratishedhe Param Karyam, which is the first step. So Purva Para is the first in the sense, last step technically, first step in the process where it is defined in the Paribhashindushekara. I'll get you started with a Bhashya of Vipratishedhe Param Karyam. I'll give a little bit of insight on what Vipratishedha means, what Vipratishedhe Param Karyam Sutra does, what are the other exceptions, like sometimes you have Purva Vipratishedha and so on. So I'll talk about this. I'll talk about these two paribhashas, Punah Prasanga Vijnana Siddham and Sakrudgato Vipratishedha Yad Baditam Tad Baditam Eva. I'll explain the meaning of these two paribhashas because they are related to Vipratishedha. Vikaranebhyo niyamo balyan is not really much related, so we can keep that aside. And then from paran nityam balavat, he starts with nitya, anitya, and so on. If you want, I'll give a quick overview of what nitya versus anitya means, utsarga versus apavada means, and antaranga versus bahiranga means, but that's like going in lot of deep waters. So let's actually see how the interest stays. We will start with Vipratishethe Param Karyam. If it becomes too much complicated, too much difficult, just let me know. We will go back to our Sadhi Prakaram. That should be the plan. Any questions so far? If not, I'm going to start with the Bhashya of Vipratishethe Param Karyam, but I'm happy to take whatever questions you want.
So this we saw many sutras competing in one step for 5 sutras in Madhu plus Jas, right, Mahodaya? So we will come back to it to choose
You should
what
be able to
sutra
resolve all
after.
of them on your own. So if you want, I'll come back to this particular example of Madhu plus Jasa. But after you have, see, only by studying Vipratishethe Param Karyam, you will not be in a position to use all the tools. But after you understand what is Nitya Anitya, what is Antaranga Bahiranga, what is Utsarga Pavada, and what is basically these 30 paribhashas, yes, you will be able to come to literally any Badaka Bhava and you will be able to resolve it. Okay? Just one quick note before we start. There are 4 tools that we talked. Vipratishedha, that is Purvapara, is one tool. Nitya Anitya is other tool. Antaranga Bahiranga is third tool. And Utsarga Pavada is fourth tool. According to you, which of these 4? Yeah. You have any questions?
One more, sorry, Mahodaya. Like one more also we studied Varnad Angam Baliyaha. So does that
Varnadangam Baliyaha and so on is a part of Antarangam and Bahirangam. Varnadangam Baliyaha is basically included in, that's what I said, that the topic is so vast that Varnadangam Baliyaha is considered, Atkruta Vyuha Panini are all considered under the title of Antaranga versus Bahiranga. Okay? Okay? They will talk about all these things if you study Paribhashin Deshak at some point in time. But so all the tools that, yeah, go ahead.
Will this paribhashas itself will have a conflict, or how is that, Mahodaya? Like,
That's a
how
very
do
good
you
question.
know?
So paribhashas usually do have conflict, not just conflict, they're like completely opposite. So first paribhasha says do this, second paribhasha says don't do this. Exact same thing. So I'll give you an example over here. Outside Badhyaka Badhaka Bhava, for example, the second paribhasha, Yathodesham Samnya Paribhasham, exactly contradicts third paribhasha, Karyakalam Samnya Paribhasha. The fourth paribhasha, Anekantaha Anubandhaha, contradicts the next paribhasha, Ekantaha Anubandhaha. Now we can even see the wording. First says Anekantaha, second says Ekantaha. Then in this particular Badhya Badhaka Bhava also, there are so many examples towards the end here. यस्य च लक्षणांतरेण निमित्तं विहन्यते न तद अनित्यम् यस्य च लक्षणांतरेण निमित्तं विहन्यते तदपि अनित्यम्. Okay, so clearly opposite. You see, यस्य च लक्षणांतरेण निमित्तं विहन्यते न तद अनित्यम् यस्य च लक्षणांतरेण निमित्तं विहन्यते न तदपि अनित्यम्. So then why are these conflicting paribhashas written like this? So the point to understand is paribhashas are not like sutras. Paribhashas don't have purva paratva. Paribhashas themselves don't have utsarga pavadatva among them. Paribhashas are tools, they are devices, they are techniques to come to the valid form. It's consider it as a toolbox. There are multiple conflicting tools and you use the right tool for the right occasion. The paribhashas are to be used to derive the correct form or to justify the derivation of the correct form, to put the derivation of the correct form in the frame of the Shastra. Okay, so paribhashas are always to be used if applicable and not blindly. If you cannot derive a required form, you use a paribhasha. Even these two paribhashas, Sakrutgato Vipratishede Yapaditam Tadbaditam and Punah Prasanga Vijnanat Siddham, completely contradictory with each other. I'm going to teach all these in today or next class. We will see that if a valid prayoga is required to apply Punah Prasanga Vijnanat Siddham, we use Punah Prasanga Vijnanat Siddham. If a valid prayoga is Sakrutgato Vipratishede, we use that. This is a revolution for students of Paninian grammar. People think that Paninian Vyakarana is expected to fit in a frame of computer. Paninian Vyakarana was never written as a set of rules which a computer can blindly execute. Paninian Vyakaran is a set of rules where the person who is deriving the correct forms knows what the correct forms are and uses the tool to justify the correct forms, not blindly create correct forms without even thinking. Okay? Any
So
questions?
can we say that the paribhashas should be taken in a contextual manner, like where
That
it
is correct.
relates?
Paribhasha should be taken in a contextual manner. A lot of them can actually be taken without context also. That's a good thing. So some of the paribhashas will automatically apply, but that's not why they were written. They were written to justify a certain prayogas, and if that paribhasha causes a problem in some other prayogas, then we don't use these paribhashas. Okay, that's why the paribhashas are also called anitya. The word anitya has nothing to do with nitya, anitya, utsarga, apavada, and so on. Anitya means use when needed, not use always. Like you cannot randomly pull a paribhasha and use it. Use when needed. Okay.
So in theory, people can come up with different prakriyas based on conflicting paribhasha or something like that. Like,
That
or
is
is it
correct.
only?
But what that is correct. But what would a wrong prakriya do if it doesn't derive a right form? See, there are two components over here. First is that the kind of paribhashas that I showed are explicitly opposing paribhashas. So there you have to use this particular fact that in a prayoga, whichever paribhasha is applicable, you use it. Barring these examples, most other cases you have paribhasha which can be applied blindly except for a handful of forms here and there, and then you use that sadasad vivek over there, that in this particular form we don't use this paribhasha, in this particular form we don't use this paribhasha, and so on. But you will come across, so for example, varnadangam baliha, somebody quoted right now, is anitya. You don't use varnadangam baliha every now and then. Okay, so it is used only under a few circumstances. Akruta vyuha paniniyaha, the even immediately after that. So you have Varnadangam baliyaha, and then next is Akruta vyuha paniniyaha. Anitya. Use some places, don't use some other places. These are like tools in your toolbox. Always understand this. Your goal is to get the work done. Never look at Paninian grammar as a toolbox. I open the toolbox, whichever tool is applicable, I use that. That's not how Paninian grammar is to be considered. There is a work to be done. You know that there is a hole in the wall that needs to be patched. You open a toolbox, you find the right tool which will patch the hole. Not take the first tool and put it on the wall and say, okay, if the hole gets patched, it gets patched, otherwise it doesn't get patched. That's never how Paninian Vyakarana should be used. And people just don't understand it. This is what people should learn right on day one, where they learn Itsamya Prakaranam. All those Anubandhas, Itsamyaka letters like Kakara in the Kta or say Nakara in the Tumun are all added not because Panini randomly added those letters and associated functionalities later on. It's reverse. Panini wanted a certain functionality to be associated with the Tum Pratyaya. And then he said, let me encode that functionality with a Nakara and with an Ukkara, and therefore he created a Pratyaya called Tum. Panini wanted had a fixed functionality for the ta pratyaya, and then he said, let me encode that functionality with an extra kakara. So he created a pratyaya called kta. Maybe he has other places where he uses without really thinking that that particular functionality should come there. So then you don't use that same rule which you used for kta. Simple example is say chunchup or chanap or jahach. These are all tadhita pratyayas. Now, if you look at the pratyaya called jahach, what would happen to jakara? Or if you look at chunchup, what will happen to chakara?
It's a
It is at the
lopa.
beginning of the pratyaya. By chutu, it should go away. But the point to understand is that Panini did not place a chakara over there with a certain prayojana in mind. Panini did not want to make it samyaka. Chunchup is a pratyaya on its own. Jahach is a pratyaya on its own. Tena vittaschunchup chanapau. Vidya chunchu. Vidya chana. Iti shabdaha atra siddhyanti. Now you cannot simply take the chunchup pratyaya and get rid of cha. Doing that is exactly like saying I open my toolbox and I use the first tool without really caring what happens to the wall. That's not how Vyakarana has to be ever studied. Clear? The fact is, in Chunchup and Chadap, the Ch was not placed with a certain Hetu in mind, therefore it should not be removed. As simple as that.
Going back to your comment on fitting the Panini Ashtadhyaya in a computer. So that to get to the result, I should know the result. Like
that is exactly right. That is like 100% truth. Language comes first, then grammar comes, isn't it? It's not reverse. Grammar doesn't dictate the language. Language dictates the grammar. So I must know that there is a form called Ramaha, and only then I should be able to derive. See, trying to fit Panini Sutras in computer is a wonderful exercise. It helps us a lot. Like for example, a lot of prakriyas on website are powered by that. But what I'm saying is that you should know what is the correct form and then try to fit, and not blindly fit and come up with a random form.
so we know the starting point, we know the ending point. Now we need to see which sutra are the right sutras.
That is exactly right. So always remember this example of a hole in the wall. You know the starting point, you have a toolbox, you know the ending point, that the hole must go away, and then you use the right tool to get rid of that hole. You know the ending point Ramaha, you know the starting point, there is a Rama Pratipatika, and then you see how can I derive Ramaha from Rama. That is Vyakarana. It's purely logical exercise.
So technically, it's not like a sadhu shabdasya vyutpattihi, or
It is
to
exactly sadhu
separate
shabdasya
asadhu.
vyutpattihi. No, that is exactly what it is. It is sadhu shabdasya vyutpattihi. It is not vyutpatti nirmitaha sadhu shabdaha. It is sadhu shabdasya vyutpattihi. It is
Yeah, but we
separating
say
sadhu
that
shabda.
to separate asadhu shabdas from sadhu shabdas, like that we say, right?
Correct.
So
So separate asadhu shabdas from sadhu shabdas means, so you create a set of tools and you say that as per my understanding, sadhu shabdas are the one that are derived by this tool. Asadhu shabdas are the ones that are not derived by this tool. But if you, for example, are unfortunately able to derive an asadhu shabda with those tools, you don't make that shabda sadhu, you change the tools. Right? And that's why all these paribhashas and all that came. Why do Vartikas come? Why do comments in the Bhashya come? Why do paribhashas come? In order to change your toolbox in such a way that sadhu shabdas, most of them can be, or all of them can be derived, and asadhu shabdas are underivable.
And sadhu shabdas are decided by the prayogas, right?
Sadhu shabdas
Can
are
we
decided by the
like that?
language, decided by the prayogas. There is not one person who comes and says this is sadhu. This is how the language shapes over the decades, over the centuries.
Are all the paribhashas by Bhashyakaraha?
That's a good question. It's a little bit outside the discussion, but what happens is in Paribhashendu Shekhara, the collection that Nagesha gives are kind of paribhashas. Some of them are accepted by Bhashya, some of them are not accepted by Bhashya. In Paribhashendu Shekhara, specifically, for example, there are a bunch of paribhashas that are not accepted by the Bhashya. Nagesha still gives this paribhasha, he explains those paribhasha, but at the end of that description, he says, I don't agree with this paribhasha because it is not accepted by Bhashyakara. Okay, so look at this. In the beginning, you have anekantaha anubandhaha, he gives the discussion, and then he says, vastutastu ekantaha idam cha tasya lopaha iti bhashye spashtam. So there is a set of paribhasha, there is a paribhasha called anekantaha anubandhaha, there is a paribhasha called ekantaha anubandhaha, and only one of them, namely ekantaha anubandhaha, is supported by Bhashyakara, anekanta is not supported by Bhashyakara. But then why does Nagesha give this? Because there are certain prayogas for which anekantaha anubandhaha is a tool that needs to be used. What do Bhashyakara does when he wants to, derive those prayogas where anikanta anubandha is used? He uses some alternate mechanisms, or he just says use anikanta anubandha and so on, but he doesn't officially state it as a paribhasha.
Yes, but even if he's not supporting the theory, he has included the paribhasha in Bhashyam. Is it so?
That is correct. That is correct. So if you go to the first line of this one, look at this. Prachina Vaiyakarana Tantre Vachanikani. In pre-Paninian grammar, there were certain paribhashas that were considered as a part of grammar. Prachina Vyakarana Tantre Vachanikani. So he talks about pre-Paninian grammar. Atra Paniniya Tantre Jnapaka Nyaya Siddhani. in this Paninian Vyakarana, these are the paribhashas that can be derived by looking at hints present in the sutras. Bhashya Vartikayoho Upanibaddhani. Bhashyakara discusses these, Vartikakara discusses these, irrespective of whether they are accepted or not. Yani paribhasha rupani tani vyakhyayante. What am I going to teach you in this book? I am going to teach a set of paribhashas which were either discussed by pre-Paninian scholars or which are the ones that can be automatically derived from Panini Sutras, or the ones that are explicitly discussed in the Bhashyakara and Vartikakara. These are the ones that I'm collecting over here.
So Bhashya is the source of all the paribhashas.
Bhashya what? Sorry,
Bhashyam is the source of all the paribhashas. We cannot.
So a direct answer to your question is every paribhasha from Paribhashantu Shekhara in the Bhashya? No. Not every paribhasha from Paribhashantu Shekhara occurs in the Bhashya. Okay. So from where does he collect? He collects it from other paribhasha books. There were 20 paribhasha books. Paribhashantu Shekhara is one of them. There are 20 different paribhasha books. He collects it from the other paribhasha books. He collects it from the previous granthas. He collects it by inference from Panini Sutras. So Jnapaka Nyaya Siddhani. Inference from Panini Sutras. And a lot of them are present in the Bhashya. Okay, so this is how Paribhashantu Shekhara is organized. So I have a question for you all. So you have these tools that we studied or we saw. Purva Para was one, Nitya Anitya was second, Antaranga Bahiranga was third, and Utsarga Apavada was fourth. In the example, simplest example is Rama plus Jasa, Rama plus whatever, Madhu plus Jasa. You saw that even a single step causes so much conflict, which you have not even imagined. And imagine a Tinganta Prakriya which is 20 steps long. In each of the steps, there will be so much conflict and so on. So there is always a scope for like using one of those 4 tools. You have a toolbox with 4 tools. Purva Para, Nitya Nitya, Utsarga Pavada, and Antaranga Bahiranga. Each two, or you say tool sets. Each tool set consists of small tools, but you can ignore that for now. 4 major tool sets. What do you think, which of them is most frequently used? Is it Utsarga Pavada? Is it Nitya Anitya? Is it Antaranga Bahiranga? Or is it Purvapara? And I just want to know a little, like, what do you think? I don't expect you to know the correct answer. What do you think?
I think Utsarga
Apavada.
Okay.
And then Purvapara.
Okay.
But yeah, Mahoday, many times we see that Pratyayasya Adesha comes first. So Antaranga Bahiranga also.
It turns out, and again, there is no reason for it. It just turns out, and it's how it happens. You see by multiple example. It turns out that the most frequently used tool is Nitya Anitya. Nitya Anitya is the most fundamental tool that is used for resolving conflict. Many times, for example, see, you have been exposed to a very small portion of grammar. So in the portion that you have been exposed, you might think that Purvapara is the most common or Utsarga Pavada is the most common. But when you look at Vyakarana Shastra in a full, Nitya Anitya is such a well developed used tool over there that a lot of modern scholars have tried to redefine their own tool or tried to create their own tools which are basically rewordings of Nitya Anitya. A very big scholar called S.D. Joshi, many of you might have heard his name, he has created a completely different theory for Badhya Bhataka Bhava, which he calls it as a Siddha theory. Siddha theory is complete remodeling of Nitya Anitya. This is just piece of information. I don't expect you to do anything with this, or I don't expect you to start applying Nitya. Probably a lot of you don't know what Nitya Nitya is. So I'm just saying that this is a simple piece of information. At some point in time, it will get used. For now, it's just okay. The irony is that in the Bhashya of Vipratishethe Param Karyam is a very big Bhashya. Vipratishethe Param Karyam Sutra itself, the Bhashya is one of the beautiful Bhashyas to study. Vipratishethe Param Karyam, it's a pretty big Bhashya. You can see that it has 28 different Vartikas. Okay, a single Bhashya has 28 different sections. Out of these 28 different sections, Vartika is basically small chunks of statements, basically paragraphs. So he takes a Vartika and he elaborates on it. He takes another Vartika and elaborates on it. So each Vartika can be considered as a separate chunk or a paragraph. Out of these 28 Vartikas, the first 7 Vartikas are about Vipratishetha. So he starts with Vipratishedha iti kaha ayam shabdaha. He starts with Vipratishedha, he starts with Purvapara and so on, goes all the way till 7th Vartika. Starting from 8th Vartika, he discusses Antaranga Bahiranga. So he discusses Vipratishedha in first 7 Vartikas, and from 8th Vartika onwards, he discusses fully Antaranga Bahiranga. He does not touch Nitya Anitya and he does not touch Utsarga Apavada in the Vipratishedhe Param Karyam. Okay, Vipratishedhe Param Karyam is fully about Antaranga Bahiranga to be technically, because see, out of 28, 8 or 7 Vartikas are for Vipratishedha. Even in that, what you were saying, there is some chunk which is used for Purva Vipratishedha. So there is a concept of Purva Vipratishedha which is being discussed. We'll talk about that. But starting from Vartika number 8 up to Vartika number 28, he continuously discusses about Antaranga Bahiranga and all those internal paribhashas of Antaranga Bahiranga present in some paribhasha 50 onwards. This najanantarye bahishva prakrutihi antaranganapi vidhin bahirango luk badhate purvotrapada nimitta karyat purvam antaranga pi ekadeshon. All these paribhashas are discussed in the bhashya of Vipratishedhe Paramkari. So Vipratishedhe, this is again a piece of information. I don't expect you to do anything with that. Vipratishedhe Paramkaryam talks about Vipratishedha and Purva Vipratishedha, that concept in the beginning, like some 15-20% of the chunk, and rest of the chunk is all about Antaranga Bahiranga.
So out of these 4, Mahodaya, so only the Utsarga Apavada does not consider the Tulya Bala. For other everything, the
Tulya Bala is a word that I have not even used, and Tulya Bala, just to answer your question, Tulya Bala is only for Vipratishedha. If there are 2 sutras, there are only 2 possibilities. Either one is fully inside the another or they overlap. When one is fully inside the another, it is Utsarga Apavada. Clearly. Which means that the only remaining condition is that they overlap. And therefore, the remaining 3 are when they overlap. So technically speaking, Tulya Balatva can be used for Nitya Nitya, Antaranga Bahiranga and Purvapara. But the fact that the 2 sutras are Tulya Bala only comes in the picture, or when it only gets used in the case of Purvapara. What I'm saying is, once you decide that it is not Utsarga Apavada, you don't care about Tulya Balatva until you pass the Antaranga and Nitya border. And then you start caring about Tulya Balatva. So even though Tulya Balatva might exist from the beginning of Antaranga Bahiranga, the Tulya Balatva concept is not a criteria under discussion in Antaranga Bahiranga and Nitya. Am I making myself clear?
Yeah, so no, I'm just thinking, can there be any other that's coming in between, like Utsarga Apavada? Tulya Bala is not there. If there is no Tulya Bala, then it has to be Utsarga Apavada
The
only.
definition
Right?
of Tulya Bala is non-existence of Tulya Balatva is Utsarga Apavada. That's the definition of Tulya Balatva. Okay. We'll see, it's there right in the beginning. Bau prasanga vanyartha ekasmin saha vipratishedha. That is the definition of Tulya Balatva, first line of Bhashya. I'll explain that when we start discussing the Bhashya line by line. I'll explain that. But basically, Vipratishedha and Tulya Balatva are synonyms, are 2 sides of the same coin, synonyms of each other. Okay. Does he use the word Tulya Balatva? He uses the word many times, I think. Tulya Balatva. He means Bhashyakara, not me. Here somewhere in the Bhashya. Tulya Balatva, Tulya Balehi Ubhe Shastre. So he talks about Tulya Balatva, Laghu Kaumadi, Tulya Bala Virodhe Param Karyam se. So that's what I'm saying. Tulya Bala Virodhe Antarangam Syat, nobody will say that. Tulya Balatve Nityam Syat, nobody will say that. But technically, if you see, if it is not Tulya Balatva, it becomes Utsarga. See, there are 2 sutras. Imagine each sutra as a circle. What is the way you place it? Either you place one sutra inside another, that's one choice, or you place 2 sutras like a Venn diagram overlapping with each other, that's another choice. The third choice is that the 2 sutras are 2 distinct circles, but then that's least interest of our discussion. Like if there is no relationship between the 2 sutras, if there is no conflict between the 2 sutras, if one sutra is only in the Tinganta Prakriya and other is only in the Subanta Prakriya, you don't really need to care about that. The only valid places are where the 2 sutras overlap or one sutra is inside another. Mathematics makes it clear there cannot be third situation.
But we can have like 2 overlapping one full thing and those multiple combinations.
Means what? See,
Like,
at
for
any point in
example,
time, you have only 2 sutras, not 3. If you have 3 sutras, then you have to mutually talk about 2. I'll come to those examples at some point in time. When there is a vipratisha of 3, not vipratisha, there is a yugapat prapti of 3, 4, 5. You take pairwise and you say this is anitya, so this gets ridden, or this is purva, this gets ridden, the next one competes with another. Like a chess tournament, only 2 people compete with each other at once, even if there are 100 people participating, right? In that. So given 2 sutras, what is the third choice? No third choice. The situation becomes a little bit more complicated when you have cases like Akassavarne Dirghaha, because Akassavarne Dirghaha now becomes an apavada for 3 or 4 sutras together. But at that point, you say that Akassavarne Dirgha is an apavada. So when it comes to an apavada, it is essentially saying one sutra is fully inside another in that particular context. That's why this Niravakashatvam apavadasya bijam is not Niravakashatvam with respect to one sutra. We never say ekasya sutrasya vishaye Niravakashatvam apavadasya bijam. We say Niravakashatvam apavadasya bijam, which means that if there are 2 or 3 sutras that come together and all of them make one sutra Niravakasha, then it is still Niravakasha. I'll give you a very simple example. If there is a worker who works on some 2 different projects, and one of the project, that worker can be replaced by some third worker, and on second project that worker can be replaced by fourth worker, then the other 2 workers together will make this first person redundant. Clear or no? Right? A single person will not be able to make him redundant, but 2 people or more people coming together will make this person redundant. Now there are only limited number of cases over there where you have 2 or a max of 3 sutras coming together to block a particular sutram. We will talk about those, but in general, in those cases, we have to extend the definition of apavada, and we say that a bigger circle consists of 2 or 3 sutras together, and then there is a smaller circle inside it.
okay, thank you.
Okay. Anything else?
So, Mahoday, this Vipratishedhe Parankaryam is the only sutra in the Paninian system that deals with conflicts. So, the Utsarga, Pavada, and everything we know only through the Paribhasha.
The point is, that's a very good question. The point is, Utsarga Apavada is hard coded in the Paninian system itself. The fundamental skeleton of Paninian system is Utsarga Apavada. The entire grammar is written on the basis of Utsarga Apavada. He writes Adgunaha and immediately he writes Vruddhirechi, which effectively says that he knows the concept of Utsarga Apavada. So, Utsarga Apavada is built and in the skeleton of Ashtadhyayi. Vipratishedhe Param Karyam is in the sutra itself. Antaranga, Bahiranga, and Nitya, Anitya are usually derived by context or by the Jnapaka. Jnapaka means the sutra itself has. So, for example, Vaha Ut. This sutra is considered as a Jnapaka for Antaranga, Bahiranga. I don't know if people have seen this article, but you should see. I think you are in a position to understand this. In Vyakarana Lekhaha, many years ago. Yeah, so this 59th article, Asiddham Bahirangam Antaranga, have you studied Vishwahavaha Shabda? Vishwauhaha is the Dvitiya Bahuvachan. So he starts with Shacharya Chatram Halanta Prakanasya Hakara Shabdan Pathen Asti. Vishwavaha ityasya Dvitiya Bahuvachanasya Vishwauhaha. What is the Prakriya? You might have studied Vaha Utha Sutra. So each of you, if you have, then I think this entire dialogue is probably easy for you to understand. This Vaha Utha Sutra itself is a Jnapaka that Panini knows the concept of Antaranga Bahiranga. Similarly, there are sutras for Nitya, Anitya, and so on. Okay, try it out if you want. You can study this 59th one. Asiddham Bhairangavantram.
Adgunaha Vruddhirechi. When one sutra encompasses another sutra entirely in itself, is there a prayojana where the first sutra is broader? Because anyway, it's going to be overruled by the second sutra for the
Lagutva, Alpaksharatva. If he wanted to clearly write an Adgunaha which is excluding Vruddhirechi, it would be much larger. So that's why Alpaksharatva combined with Utsarga Apavadatva is what makes it concise.
Okay.
Any other question on this Vipratishedhe Param Karyam topic? There's something, last thing that I'll tell you and leave you in complete awe situation, and we will stop. Vipratishedhe Param Karyam is the second sutram in 1.4. What is the first sutram in 1.4? Akadarādika samya. What does this sutra mean?
when in this samya, in this adhikara, if there are two samyas defined, only one samya will be applicable.
Okay. Panini starts 1.4.1 by saying akadara deka samnya, and then in this adhikara, when there are multiple samnyas defined, it will be one samnya, akadara eka samnya. Okay. How do you choose which samnya?
We do the same thing, right? Like if it kind of a utsarga apavada or the antarang, right, antaranga bahiranga also is there. Like we do
So that is your
padasamya,
anumana. So that is your anumana. The Panini does not say which samnya to be chosen. A lot of scholar believes that Panini actually tells us what samnya to choose. He says akadara deka samnya vipratishedhe param karyam. The very reason why vipratishedhe param karyam comes immediately after akadara deka samnya is because vipratishedhe param karyam is only in the context of akadara deka samnya. Vipratishedhe param karyam has nothing to do with badhyabadaka bhava. A lot of scholars, including Mahabhashya, talks about this. Okay, Mahabhashya in akadara deka samnya he says ubhayatha hi acharyena shishyaha pratipaditaha ubhayatha hi acharyena shishyaha sutram pratipaditaha. Panini, when he was teaching his students, he taught in two different ways. To some students, he said akadara deka samnya. For some other students, he taught prakadarat param karyam. Instead of akadarat eka samnya and vipratishedhe param karyam, he just created one sutram called prakadarat param karyam. And the reason why Panini could do this kind of different sutras, kaschatra vishesha tatra eka samnyadhikare tadvachanam. Vipratishedhe param karyam is only for eka samnyadhikara. It has nothing to do with outside ekasamnyadhikara. Meaning, Panini never coded any Badhyabadhaka Bhava Sutras in Ashtadhyayi because it is difficult to believe that he talks about Vipratishedha Purvapara and he doesn't talk about Nitya Nitya and he doesn't talk about Utsarga Apavada directly and he doesn't talk about Antaranga Bahiranga. So why would he only talk about Vipratishedha? So the point is, Panini doesn't even talk about Vipratishedha. Bhadyavadaka bhava is completely on us to infer. Panini simply gives the sutras and he gives the jnapakas by which we can infer Utsarga Pavada, Antaranga Bahiranga, Nitya Anitya and Purvapara. And Vipratishedhe Param Karyam is only an extension of Akadara Deka Samnya. Akadara Deka Samnya says a single Samnya has to be used. Vipratishedhe Param Karyam says that in case of conflict of two Samnyas, use the Parasamnya. That's simple as that. Okay. Let's stop on this point and we will continue in the next class.